My fiancée demanded I take out a $300,000 loan for her dream wedding, claiming if I truly loved her, money wouldn't matter. When I refused to bankrupt myself for one day, she called off our engagement and her mother accused me of being cheap. 3 months later, Karma delivered the most satisfying revenge when her elaborate backup plan with her wealthy ex-boyfriend spectacularly backfired, leaving her more humiliated than she ever made me feel. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We are just starting and your support means a lot. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. My name is David, I'm 31 years old, my ex-fiancée Stephanie Walsh, 27, demanding I go into crippling debt for her fantasy wedding to realize that real love should never come with a price tag that could destroy your future. Working as a boutique manager in downtown Portland, she was stunning in that effortless way some women have, with long auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to light up when she smiled. I was completely smitten from our first coffee date. She had this infectious energy and big dreams that made my quiet life as an accountant seem boring by comparison. Stephanie talked constantly about her future wedding, even early in our relationship. Not our wedding, mind you, but her wedding. She'd been planning it since she was a little girl, she told me, and had binders full of magazine clippings, Pinterest boards, and detailed spreadsheets of everything she wanted. At first, I found her enthusiasm charming. Here was a woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to dream big. We dated for 2 years before I proposed, and during that time, Stephanie's wedding fantasies only grew more elaborate. She'd show me pictures of $1,000 centerpieces and designer gowns that cost more than my monthly salary. When I gently suggest we might want to start smaller, she'd get this hurt look in her eyes and say things like, "Don't you want our wedding to be special?" Or "This is supposed to be the most important day of our lives." The proposal itself was a production that Stephanie essentially directed. Dropped hints about the ring she wanted for months, sent me links to the exact style, and even had her best friend Megan, who was 28, casually mention that Stephanie preferred platinum to gold. The ring cost me 3 months' salary, but seeing her face when I got down on one knee made it worth every penny. Or so I thought at the time. The problems started almost immediately after she said yes. Stephanie transformed from a woman who dreamed about weddings into a woman possessed by them. She quit her job at the boutique, claiming she needed to focus on planning full-time. When I expressed concern about losing her income right when we needed to save for the wedding, she brushed off my worries. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, David," she'd say. "We can't cut corners on the most important day of our lives." It was always the most important day of our lives, never just our wedding day. Like the rest of our life together was somehow less significant than this one event. Stephanie's mother, Patricia Walsh, 53, was her biggest enabler. Patricia had apparently been saving for Stephanie's wedding since she was born, but the fund she'd accumulated was maybe $15,000, enough for a nice but modest celebration. This was nowhere near sufficient for Stephanie's vision, which involved a destination wedding in Tuscany, a designer dress, flowers flown in from Holland, and a guest list of 200 people. When I sat down with Stephanie to go through our actual finances, the conversation went off the rails immediately. Showed her our savings, our monthly expenses, and what we could realistically afford without going into debt. Based on our combined income and savings, we could have a beautiful wedding for about $30,000, maybe 40 if we stretched. Stephanie's face went white as I explained the numbers. 40,000, she repeated, like I'd suggested we get married at McDonald's. "David, the venue alone is going to cost more than that. The dress I want is 12,000. The flowers are 8,000. The photographer is 15,000. I tried to stay calm and reasonable. "Steph, those are just starting points for negotiation. We can find beautiful alternatives that fit our budget. There are amazing photographers who charge half that. We can find a stunning dress for 3,000 instead of 12. Wedding will still be perfect because it's about us, not about how much we spend." But Stephanie wasn't hearing any of it. She pulled out her planning binders and started going through item by item, explaining why each expense was non-negotiable. The venue had to be the historic mansion because it was the only place that matched her vision. The dress had to be the Vera Wang because she'd been dreaming about it for years. Photographer had to be this specific person because his style was exactly what she wanted for their wedding album. "If you loved me, you'd find a way to make this happen," she said, and that phrase would become her go-to weapon whenever I tried to inject reality into her planning. Over the next few months, Stephanie's wedding plans grew more extravagant, not less. She added a string quartet for the ceremony, upgraded the reception to include a 7-course meal, and decided we needed welcome bags for out-of-town guests that cost $50 each. When I pointed out that we were now looking at a wedding that would cost over $200,000, she had an answer ready. Talk to Patricia and she thinks you should take out a loan, Stephanie said casually, like she was suggesting I pick up milk at the store. It's an investment in our future. This is the wedding our children will see in photos someday. Don't you want them to be proud of what their parents created? The loan conversation was where I should have seen the red flags, but I was still trying to be the supportive fiancé. Stephanie had researched personal loans and found that I could qualify for up to $300,000 if I used my house as collateral. The monthly payments would be nearly $4,000, more than my take-home pay, but she'd calculated that if she got a job after the wedding and we were careful with expenses, we could manage it. Careful with expenses, I asked. Stephanie, this loan would mean we couldn't afford to have children for at least 10 years. We couldn't take vacations, couldn't buy a new car, couldn't do anything but pay for a wedding that lasts one day. Her response was to burst into tears and accuse me of not caring about her happiness. Every girl dreams of her perfect wedding, she sobbed. I thought you'd want to give me that dream. I thought you loved me enough to make sacrifices. The emotional manipulation was masterful. Stephanie had a way of making every conversation about the wedding into a test of my love for her. If I questioned expense, I was being unsupportive. If I suggested alternatives, I was crushing her dreams. If I mentioned our financial reality, I was being cheap and unromantic. Mother Patricia made things worse by constantly reinforcing Stephanie's demands. David, honey, she'd say with that syrupy sweet voice, Stephanie has been planning this wedding her whole life. Don't you want to see her happy? The money will work itself out. Easy for her to say when she wasn't the one who'd be making payments for the next 15 years. The breaking point came 6 months before our planned wedding date. Stephanie had been increasingly distant, spending most of her time at her mother's house working on wedding plans. When she was home, she was either on wedding planning websites or on the phone with vendors. We hadn't had a real conversation about anything other than the wedding in months. I tried one more time to have a rational discussion about our finances. I'd made a spreadsheet showing exactly how the loan payments would affect our life, including how long it would take us to pay it off and what we'd have to give up to make it work. I thought if I could just show her the numbers clearly, she'd understand why I was concerned. Instead, Stephanie exploded. I can't believe you're still being cheap about this, she screamed. You know how embarrassing it is to tell my friends that my fiancé won't pay for the wedding I want. Madison's fiancé bought her a $40,000 ring and they're having their reception at the Four Seasons, but I have to beg my future husband to take out a loan for our once-in-a-lifetime day. Stephanie, this isn't about being cheap, I said, trying to stay calm. This is about not destroying our financial future for one day. Could have an amazing wedding for $40,000. We could put the rest toward a house or starting a family or building a life together. If you can't put yourself in debt for me, then you don't really love me, she said, and her voice was ice cold. If you can't make this sacrifice for the most important day of our lives, then maybe we shouldn't be getting married at all. I stared at her, this woman I'd been planning to spend my life with, and realized I was looking at a stranger. When had her love become conditional on my willingness to bankrupt myself? When had our wedding become more important than our marriage? You're right, I said quietly. If your love depends on me taking on debt that will cripple us for 15 years, then maybe we shouldn't get married. Stephanie's face went white. I don't think she expected me to call her bluff. What are you saying? I'm saying that I won't take out a $300,000 loan for a wedding. I won't mortgage our future for one day, no matter how perfect you want it to be. If that means you don't want to marry me, then I guess we have our answer. The fight that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had. Stephanie accused me of being selfish, cheap, and unromantic. She said I was ruining her dreams and destroying her life. She called her mother, who immediately came over and joined in the attack, telling me I was being unreasonable and that any man who really loved Stephanie would find a way to give her the wedding she deserved. Fine, Stephanie finally said, pulling off her engagement ring and throwing it at me. If you're too cheap to marry me properly, then don't marry me at all. I'll find someone who actually values me enough to invest in our future. And just like that, our 3-year relationship was over. Stephanie moved out that weekend, taking all her wedding planning materials and leaving behind only the things she couldn't fit in her car. House felt empty and quiet in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The aftermath was brutal. Stephanie immediately launched a campaign to paint me as the villain in our breakup. She told everyone who would listen that I was cheap and controlling, that I'd refused to pay for our wedding because I didn't really love her. Friends, including Megan, started posting passive-aggressive things on social media about men who don't appreciate good women. Patricia called me several times, alternately begging me to reconsider and telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Stephanie is a catch, she'd say. You'll never find another woman like her. The more time passed, the more I realized that was exactly what I was hoping for. My friends and family were more supportive. My brother Kevin, who's 29, had never liked Stephanie and wasn't shy about saying so. "Dude, she was using you," he told me bluntly. "No one who actually loves you would demand you go into crushing debt for a party." My mother, 62-year-old Linda Chen, was more diplomatic but equally clear. "David, honey, marriage is about partnership and compromise. If she wasn't willing to work with you on something this important, what would happen when you faced real challenges together?" For the first month after the breakup, I went through all the stages of grief. I missed Stephanie, questioned my decision, and wondered if I should have just taken out the loan. Maybe I was being too practical, too focused on money when I should have been focused on love. But as time passed and the fog of emotional manipulation cleared, I started to see our relationship more clearly. Stephanie had never been interested in building a life together. She'd been interested in having a wedding and had seen me as the financing for her fantasy. Quit her job, spent every day planning an event we couldn't afford, and demanded I destroy my financial future to make her dreams come true. 3 months after our breakup, I heard through mutual friends that Stephanie had started dating someone new. Connor Bradley, 35, was the son of a prominent local businessman, and exactly the kind of man who could afford Stephanie's dream wedding without blinking. Apparently they'd met at some charity event Patricia had taken Stephanie to, and it was love at first sight, or love at first portfolio statement. I felt a stab of jealousy when I first heard about Connor, but it passed quickly. If Stephanie had moved on that fast, it confirmed what I'd already started to suspect: our relationship had never been as meaningful to her as it was to me. I was a placeholder, a practice run for the real thing. The wedding planning started immediately. Within weeks of dating Connor, Stephanie was already showing off her new engagement ring, a massive diamond that made the one I'd bought her look modest by comparison. She posted constantly about wedding venues and dress shopping, making sure everyone knew that this time she was getting the wedding she deserved. Stephanie seemed to take particular pleasure in making sure I heard about her new relationship. She'd show up at places she knew I frequented, always with Connor in tow, making sure to talk loudly about their wedding plans. She posted photos of venue visits and dress fittings with captions about how amazing it was to be with someone who supported her dreams. Message was clear: Connor was everything I wasn't. He was wealthy enough to give her the wedding she wanted, sophisticated enough to appreciate her refined tastes, and man enough to prioritize her happiness over practical concerns like money. I was the cheap, boring accountant who tried to force her to settle for less than she deserved. For a while it worked. I felt like maybe I had been too rigid, too focused on the money, instead of on making Stephanie happy. Seeing her glowing social media posts about Connor's romantic gestures and expensive surprises made me question whether I'd made a terrible mistake. But then, 6 months after Stephanie's engagement to Connor, I ran into Megan at a coffee shop. Megan had been Stephanie's closest friend and biggest supporter during our relationship, so I was surprised when she approached me instead of pretending not to see me. "David," she said, sitting down at my table without being invited, "I need to apologize to you." I was confused. "Apologize for what?" "For believing Stephanie's version of why you two broke up," Megan said, looking uncomfortable. "I thought you were being cheap and unreasonable, but now that I've seen how she is with Connor, I realize you were just being smart." Megan went on to explain what she'd witnessed over the past few months. Stephanie's behavior with Connor was even worse than it had been with me. She'd quit the part-time job she'd gotten after our breakup, claiming she needed to focus on wedding planning. She'd convinced Connor to buy her a new car because her old one wasn't appropriate for a future Bradley family member. She'd moved into his apartment and immediately started redecorating, spending thousands of dollars on furniture and art without consulting him. "She's not planning a wedding, David," Megan said quietly. "She's planning a hostile takeover of Connor's life. The scary thing is, I don't think she even realizes she's doing it." But the most interesting part of Megan's story was about Connor himself. Apparently, he wasn't quite the wealthy prince that Stephanie thought she'd landed. Connor's family had money, but Connor himself was something of a disappointment to them. He'd bounced between jobs, had a gambling problem, and was living on an allowance from his father that came with strings attached. "His dad controls all the money," Megan explained. "And from what I hear, he's not impressed with Stephanie. Connor's been trying to get his father to pay for this elaborate wedding, but the old man thinks she's a gold digger and refuses to fund it." The wedding that Stephanie had been planning and posting about so triumphantly was falling apart. Connor didn't actually have access to the family money she thought he did, and his father had made it clear that if Connor wanted to marry Stephanie, he'd have to pay for it himself. With what money, nobody knew. 2 weeks after my conversation with Megan, the whole house of cards came crashing down. Connor's father, apparently fed up with his son's latest romantic drama, cut off his allowance completely. Connor, faced with the choice between Stephanie and his family's money, chose the money. He broke up with Stephanie via text message and moved back in with his parents. The fallout was spectacular. Stephanie had been so confident in her new relationship that she'd been publicly humiliating me for months, making sure everyone knew how much better Connor was than her cheap ex-fiancé. She'd posted about venue deposits, dress fittings, and elaborate honeymoon plans. She'd even sent out save the dates. Now she had to face all those same people and explain that her perfect relationship had imploded. The man she'd held up as an example of what real love looked like had dumped her as soon as his money was threatened. The fairy tale wedding she'd been planning had evaporated overnight. The universe wasn't done with Stephanie yet. Connor, apparently feeling guilty about the breakup, had confided in some mutual friends about Stephanie's behavior during their relationship. Word spread quickly about how she'd quit her job, spent his money freely, and pressured him for an expensive wedding just like she'd pressured me. Narrative Stephanie had carefully constructed about being a woman who deserved the best suddenly flipped. Instead of being the victim of a cheap ex-fiancé, she became the gold digger who targeted two different men for their money and lost both of them when they saw through her act. The social media posts that had once showcased her perfect new life became evidence of her materialistic priorities. Stories about Connor's romantic gestures and expensive gifts now looked like documentation of her mercenary approach to relationships. Her friends, many of whom had supported her during our breakup, began to distance themselves. Patricia, who had been so instrumental in encouraging Stephanie's demands during our relationship, suddenly went quiet. No more phone calls about how I was making a mistake, no more lectures about what real love looks like. I heard through the grapevine that even Patricia was embarrassed by how quickly Stephanie had moved on from me and how badly her new relationship had ended. The most satisfying moment came about a month after Connor's breakup text. I was at the grocery store when I literally ran into Stephanie in the produce section. She looked tired and stressed, nothing like the glowing bride-to-be from her social media posts. "David," she said, and for a moment I thought she might pretend not to see me, but instead she looked directly at me with something that might have been regret. "How are you doing?" "I'm good, Stephanie," I said honestly. "Really good, how are you?" She bit her lip, a gesture I remembered from when we were together, and she was trying not to cry. "I'm okay. I heard you bought a house." I had bought a house, a beautiful 3-bedroom place with a big backyard and room to grow. It was exactly the kind of house Stephanie and I could have bought together if we hadn't spent $300,000 on a wedding. "Yeah, I closed last month. It's perfect." "That's great," she said, and I could hear the genuine emotion in her voice. "David, I wanted to apologize for how things ended between us, for the things I said." I looked at this woman who had once demanded I bankrupt myself to prove my love, who had called me cheap and unromantic, who had publicly humiliated me for months after our breakup. She looked smaller somehow, less confident, like someone who had learned some hard truths about herself and the world. "I appreciate that, Stephanie," I said. "I hope you're doing okay." "I got a job," she said quickly, like she needed me to know she was taking care of herself. "At a marketing firm downtown. It's good work, good people. I'm learning a lot." "That's wonderful." "Always were smart and capable when you applied yourself," she smiled sadly. "Yeah, well, turns out I needed to apply myself more than I thought." She paused, then added quietly, "You were right about the wedding, you know, about the money, about the priorities. I just couldn't see it at the time." I felt a wave of something that wasn't quite satisfaction but wasn't pity either. Maybe it was just closure. "We both learned something from it, I think." "Yeah," she said, "we did." We stood there for another moment, two people who had once planned to spend their lives together, now strangers making small talk in a grocery store. Then Stephanie smiled, a real smile this time, not the performative one I'd grown used to during our relationship. "Take care of yourself, David," she said. "You deserve to be happy." "You too, Stephanie, you really do." As I watched her walk away, I felt the last remnants of anger and hurt dissolve. Stephanie wasn't evil, she was just young and confused about what mattered in life. She'd bought into a fantasy about weddings and romance that had blinded her to the reality of what makes relationships work. The price she'd paid for that fantasy was losing 2 relationships and having to face some uncomfortable truths about herself. But in the end, her betrayal had been a gift. It had shown me what I wouldn't accept in a relationship, what my non-negotiables were, and how important it was to be with someone who shared my values. It taught me that love without respect and partnership was just obsession, and that no amount of chemistry could make up for fundamental incompatibility. 6 months later, I met Rachel, a 30-year-old teacher who thought my reluctance to go into debt for a party was a sign of maturity, not cheapness. When we talked about our future wedding, she laughed and said she'd rather put money toward a house than flowers that would die in a week. Got married in her parents' backyard for $3,000, and it was absolutely perfect. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken out that loan, if I'd given Stephanie the wedding she demanded. Would we have been happy living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make payments on a debt incurred for one day of celebration? she have been satisfied, or would there have been other demands, other tests of my love that involved sacrificing my well-being for her fantasies? I'll never know, and I'm grateful for that. The best revenge against someone who tries to manipulate you isn't hurting them back, it's refusing to let them damage your future and building something better without them. Stephanie learned that lesson the hard way, and while I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, I can't say I'm sorry it happened. Love should make you want to build something together, not tear each other down in pursuit of impossible dreams. Real partnership means facing reality together and making decisions that benefit both people, not demanding that one person sacrifice everything for the other's fantasy. Grateful to Stephanie for showing me what I didn't want in a relationship, even if that wasn't her intention. Sometimes the best gift someone can give you is revealing their true character before you've committed to a future with them. The $300,000 wedding that ended our relationship was expensive, but not nearly as expensive as a marriage built on manipulation and impossible demands would have been.